Excellent, guys. All right. Well, we had started last week. We were talking about the growth of the yeshiva movement in Europe in the 19th century. Up until then, there were I didn't even know this myself. The yeshiva world is from that 19th and then the 20th century. Prior to that, boys would learn more privately with a rav in their town. I mean, maybe they would travel to another town if there was a more prominent rav, and then the rav would have like a large group, let's say, of students, but it wasn't a yeshiva, a separate building. And the first one to do that, that's Rav Chaim Volozhin, who was in Toronto, and he founded the Volozhin Yeshiva. And that's what we were talking about last time. We're talking about the Volozhin Yeshiva, which was an extremely great. And then even to like something new that I had learned. So while he was there, he also had another Rav who was invited to be part of the Volozhin Yeshiva, and that was Rabbi Yosef Dover Halevi Soloveitchik. So this is how, first time you hear about this Soloveitchik name, but you'll see he's going to leave eventually, found his own yeshiva, but he got his start, with his prominent position, like an assistant to I think it's already in the time period of the Nitziv. So after a kind of Volozhin, there were two prominent rabbanim then at the head of the Volozhin yeshiva. Okay, and one at the end is going to be the Nitziv. His last name is Berlin, and then Chaim Sal. Well, it's Yosef Dover. Soloveitchik. Okay. All right, so I have their various dates. What's that? There, I think there's still one left over there. So help yourself. All right. Okay. Okay. So right. So just know that we're talking about past Chaim Volozhin. The next to leave the yeshiva will be the Nitziv. Okay, let me just make sure I have everything in order for you. Rav Chaim died already in 1929. The yeshiva was founded in 1803. Okay, so I told you it's all product of the 19th century. So the yeshiva did not come to existence in 1903. Again, it was Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin again, right? A student of the Vilna Gaon. There already was a dream, I think, of the Vilna Gaon. It didn't happen in his lifetime, but his prime student, who was Rav Chaim, and then he's called a Volozhin because that's where he founded the yeshiva. Probably initially, he was in Vilna, right, where he learned from the Vilna Gaon, right, and then he founded this yeshiva. And it's considered to be like the mother of all the yeshivot because it was the very first, and it really grew tremendously. Okay, and I just to repeat because I think it's so interesting. So there were four main principles upon which the yeshiva Volozhin was founded: necessity for the personal influence and interaction between the teacher and the student. Perhaps, from your own children or grandchildren, they go to study in a particular yeshiva, wherever it might be, but they'll gain the most if they can have some sort of a relationship with their rav.
Are you reading on page number 5?
No, we're going to start 5, but I'm just reviewing on page 3. I'm just reviewing here. Okay. Then it says there was the idea of that one should have communal study. Like we in a base medrash, where many students are learning together. It sort of impacts you if you're in an atmosphere, right, of this intensive Torah learning. Yes, and then you have an individual partner, but the idea was to be amongst many other students. And then, of course, stress on this and the building of self-confidence and personal self-worth. And also the infusion of the feeling of joy that, that learning should be, bring you much happiness. Okay, and they get rid of the Pilpul way of learning. They felt that that was totally unnecessary. Okay, Raphael dies right in 1821. His son then takes over. And this is the time period, remember, when the czars interfering with Jewish education. All right, so big battle with always the czarist authorities. And also he would help to reconcile, the dispute between the Misnagdim and the Hasidim. But their prime thing that they're going to end up fighting against is Haskalah, the growth of that particular movement. He dies in 1849. It then goes to the sons-in-law, right? So one is a man, Rav Elazar Yitzhak Reed. That was his oldest son-in-law. But then he died, unfortunately, at a very young age. So then another son-in-law, and this is the next very famous head of the Volozhin Yeshiva, is Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, known as the Netziv. Okay. He was born in 1817, said already 1831. He got married. He married just Rabbi Yitzchak's daughter. You'll see so many times it's an intermingling of, if it's not the son, it's a son-in-law. I mean, we learned that already. Starting even in the 1500s, the 1600s, this pattern had developed. They talked about what he wrote. We don't have to do that. Okay. And then he made his associate was this Rav Yosef Dov Ber Soloveitchik. Okay, so I'm on page 5 now. So let's continue with that. I think I'm at the this Dov Ber obviously was a genius. We don't know all the Soloveitchiks were brilliant. But they had different styles, of learning and different philosophies of, how to educate the students in the yeshiva. There's actually a din Torah to decide, but the determination in the end was no. The Netziv is he's going to remain at the head, and the Rabbi Soloveitchik, would be the assistant. But it says in 1865, so I'm in this first main paragraph.
Page 5.
Yeah, a comment.
Yeah, that this, what was his name? Berlin.
Yeah.
Married at the age of 14.
Yeah, they married very. Listen, I'm in the middle doing Daf Yomi in the Gemara, and I'm like a little horrified. But they talk about boys getting married and whether they can actually impregnate somebody at the age of 9. And they talk about girls getting married at the age of 3. I know. So, hey, we're not talking about like Rivka, who was claimed to be 3 years old, when she married Yitzhak, but I don't know. This is the Gemara. So we're talking about up to the year 450. That's when the Gemara was compiled. So obviously, and they're whatever. I'm getting a little sicker and sicker as I'm reading. And this is, I'm going to tell you, this is a long, convoluted conversation in the Gemara about all
the
this.
general population engaged in that.
They did get married at young age.
Well, they died at a young age.
Not everybody lived to old age. I mean, some of these Rabbanim were blessed, with living a long time. But apparently already in that era, most people, did not live beyond.
I think they were old.
Maybe into their 50s, 60s, the most. Some died much younger. Maybe that's why they had so many children, because they hoped some would survive, and go on. I mean, a lot of children died, I remember going through the cemetery once in Rochester. That's where my husband's, family is buried. And you see these little graves, where you saw these little people had died, at the very, because they had all kinds of illnesses and we didn't have the medication to treat it.
Vaccination.
Never. Okay. All right. So Rob Dov Ber, he leaves Volozhin and he becomes a rabbi of his town called Plut. We'll do more about that soon. And then it became known as the Ralph of Brisk, or the Brisker Wug. Right, right. So we'll learn more about those yeshivas as we go on. Okay, now we're going to actually go into my text that I got for you. Okay, in 1865, a great fire swept Volozhin, where wooden homes, right, thatch roofs were quickly consumed. So when I visited Shalom in London, there was a great fire there at an earlier time period. So there's actually a place my son took me to, might have been the 1500s, 16, I can't remember. They claim it was from like a spark, or after it's from a bakery in the area. And I guess so. There's now a monument, big monument, in one of these little squares in London. I'm talking about the original, city of London. And from there, the fire spread again because the homes were at that point all made of wood. And the miracle, the nace that occurred was that the Jewish community was like south of there, and the fire spread but stopped just before where all the Jews were living at that point in London. Maybe it is in the 18th. I have to look it up. I forget when this great fire was in London.
But it wasn't the one with the riot, 1780.
In London? There's no riots. No. No, the Jews are pretty established, living in England at that point. I mean, they first came in the earlier 1654, if I remember correctly. So maybe this is the 1700s when there was this great. But the idea is just to say that because the homes were all built of wood, that's happened in the US too. So today, certainly, if you go to London and you're in this neighborhood, everything's built of stone, right? Because I figured that was the only way to counter, because this would occur periodically. Like, remember that great fire in Chicago, and I know New York City, I think, had some fires, right? And the San Francisco, even though we know about the great earthquake, I think that's 1906. What happened was then, because of the terrible shaking of the earth, so again, fire broke out, and that's what destroyed the city. It was the fire, it wasn't the earthquake per se. It was this terrible fire. Okay, so in 1865, there's this great fire happens in Volozhin. The yeshiva building was burned to the ground, together with its library and many original manuscripts from Chaim and Rabbi Yitzchak of Volozhin. The Nitziv devoted his entire energies to the rebuilding of the yeshiva, and a new 3-story structure was built. So this looked very impressive. More students arrived, and the yeshiva grew to 400 students.
Wow.
I mean, from the time of just having a Rebbe teaching maybe in his house or maybe in a basement, just now we have this huge institution with hundreds of students. A new driving force was now added to the staff of the yeshiva, together with the Nitziv, made Volozhin the magnet that attracted the greatest minds of Jewish Russia into the 1870s and 1880s. And he was Rav Dober's son, so we have another Soloveitchik involved, Rav Chaim Halevi Soloveitchik. And his dates there are 1853 to 1918. He arrived in Volozhin 1873, married the granddaughter of the Nitziv. They're all like interrelated, I mean, I don't think they would have given such a responsible position to somebody who wasn't really learned. But you know what it was? They heard of different great students. If their sons themselves, weren't masters. So then they would arrange for their daughters to marry these brilliant students. And that way, they became incorporated. And in 1880, he was appointed associate head of the yeshiva with the Nitziv. Reb Chaim completed the revolution in Torah learning. Turn the page, around 6 now. Methodology that became the hallmark of the Lithuanian yeshivas. So the way of learning, I mean, even YU now is a product, of the, they learn it in a particular derech. Though it says here that this Rabbi Chaim Halevi Salvation dies in 1918. So my Zeta learned under him. Because my Zeta was born in 1880s. I don't remember the exact year. Earlier 1880s, certainly before 1885. And didn't come to America until 1907. At that point, he was already married to my grandmother. But he had learned. He for whatever the reason, he didn't go to the yeshivas. He would learn privately with some of these very great rabbis.
I have a question.
Yes,
Did the yeshivas cost money then back then or no?
they would house the boys usually at people's homes. Who obviously these were people who could afford to take them in. Although they weren't all necessarily wealthy people, but they wanted to help support. And there was a lot of fundraising that took place. They would travel around, they would send different emissaries from the yeshiva. Not just even in Lithuania. I mean, up until then, the trend had been you would raise the money within your town. But this is a huge thing. And they're attracting students from all over. So they would travel throughout Lithuania, Poland. They would go, but they would also go to Germany, wherever they felt there was a Jewish community who would support this idea of learning in a yeshiva. At this point, I mean, I told you the yeshiva was founded in 1803, so it's got quite a fine, reputation already at this point. Okay, so I'm on page 6, right? Clarity of thought, unswerving logic, and above all, rigorous intellectual honesty were the basics of Rav Chaim's derech of learning. And since I'm a product of Manhattan Central, which is the high school for Yeshiva University. So I would say, yeah, this is how we were taught. Just strict textual study and interpretation with a meforshim. Wouldn't go off into any tangents. It was very, a straightforward learning. So, but as a result, I got a very excellent education. The one thing that I know, in a lot of day schools nowadays, the yeshiva katanas, the big stress on, maybe it's because of the Muslim movement, big stress on midos. I didn't learn midos as a subject. I mean, I just was incorporated into my being by observing my teachers, the Rebbeim I had, or then became some very well-educated women who were teaching also. It's just like I didn't have to look, or like the concept of tzedakah. I mean, I think every day they would pass around like a pushka to collect some money. I remember when the time I got to Stern, so I was very involved with the tzedakah campaign they had one year. And so I would go around the dorm. I lived in the dorm, asking for people's contribution. And I would do this on a weekly basis. Different days I would do different floors, in the dorm. I remember a girl saying to me, "Well, you were just here." I mean, the concept, I couldn't believe it because I was so used to giving some tzedakah every day. And here, it was a week ago that I was there, and she's saying, "Oh, you're here again?" But, well, she had a different background. I mean, Stern, where girls coming from all over, the US, actually South America, we had girls. Anyways, it says, once again, who were the two great personalities? This is the Netziv and this Rav Chaim, who's the younger man at that point. They complemented each other and they enhanced the yeshiva. You can see what strong influence now the Soloveitchiks are going to be having in the yeshiva world. Under their leadership, Volozhin nurtured and produced almost 3 generations of Jewish leadership, rabbinic, lay. Not everybody became a rabbi, or a teacher, but they were well versed in learning, and even secular. You can take that same knowledge and apply it, right, to just general studies. Math was a big thing that they, would study. Okay, now the interference of the czar. We had already learned about this. Now, just to show you how it's going to apply to the yeshiva and to such a detrimental effect. The experience of Volozhin in its dealings with the czarist authorities mirrored the plight of Russian Jewry generally. Beginning in 1827, okay, so the yeshiva was founded in 1803. The Russian government began its interference in the educational policies and institutions of the Jews. In this effort, this is really never sad, but this is also a pattern. The government was abetted by the efforts of the growing Haskalah movement in Russia. I think, they should have been ashamed of themselves, but they were like so anti, the yeshiva movement, so they were willing to collaborate with the authorities, to interfere. All right, in 1835, new laws were passed to define the role of the rabbi, required him to be fluent in Russian. I mean, nowadays we would say this is a given, that whoever heads an important institution or communal position has to be, fluent in whatever language or where they're living. But this only first started becoming a problem there in this earlier part of the 19th century. In 1844, the Russian government, again with the cooperation of the leaders of the Haskalah movement, founded 2 rabbinical colleges. You can imagine them, you don't have any great yeshiva students coming out of them. One was in Vilna, one was in Zhytomyr. These institutions were meant to produce the new style of rabbi that the Tsar demanded. In 1853, the government announced only graduates of these 2 official seminaries would be allowed to function as rabbis. Obviously, people got around this law, but this was officially, yes. And in 1859, the government proclaimed that secular studies, which then would have included mathematics, geography, Russian language, and culture, were to be included as part of the curriculum of the yeshiva. So like time had to be spent. That's nowadays. So now it is acceptable. But in those days, it wasn't. If you were in a yeshiva, you were there to learn Torah, Gemara, whatever, the whole spectrum, from morning to night. You wouldn't have devoted yourself to secular studies. This is interesting. Next paragraph. The Nitzit had no intention of allowing forced secular studies to become an official part of the yeshiva curriculum. He would not bow to the official law of the government in this matter. And he's not going to cooperate. There were periods when secular studies were taught in Volozhin in a separate building to a limited number of students and by non-Jewish teachers. So like if anybody would come in, they would say, oh, look here, they are, right. This was done to satisfy the local authorities who were also continuously given bribes to overlook the broad non-compliance of the yeshiva with government regulations. So unfortunately, that's part and parcel of the life, that the Jews were subjected to, that, you wanted to get something done and the government was trying to interfere. So you bribe certain officials and look the other way. However, the pressure of the leaders of the Haskalah, as well as that of the Russian government, continued to increase, regardless of these attempts to mollify them. That's what I gotta tell you. I know so much about my data. So he's living in Cincinnati, and it was a problem of building a new mikveh. And all of a sudden, now the Reform got involved in this dispute, and they even brought it as a case It's, I guess through the city authorities, not to allow these Orthodox backward Jews to build this mikvah. I mean, the judge voted against the reform. Might say that, gave a very, I don't, essentially, he didn't speak English all that well, but, maybe he had somebody who translated his words, I'm not sure. And I remember when my father founded the day school in Harrisburg, that was in 1943, who opposed him was the reform. Yeah, those other Jews. The reform, really is sad. I mean, nowadays, I think we get along better, well, the conservative movement is dying now, unfortunately. You look at this, don't you have a big conservative shul right here on the premises, and nobody really goes there anymore.
They're building a medical center.
Here?
Yeah,
Oh, on the premises?
yeah.
Oh, that'll be wonderful. Yeah, so you don't have to necessarily go schlepping out every time, you're feeling well.
Well, they have too much
Space, right. And this will bring in more income also to the place.
Yeah.
But as I say, unfortunately, it's often our own fellow Jews who cause us more harm than even the outside sources. All right, where am I up to? Okay, so now just to show you how people got involved against the yeshiva. So the first paragraph on page 7. In 1877, a disgruntled student of Volozhin falsely informed the authorities that the Netziv personally and Volozhin generally were engaged in anti-government activities. So doesn't this remind you of those Jews in the medieval times who had converted to Christianity and kept on saying also, oh, then in the Gemara, there were all these anti-Christian allusions and, as proof. He produced a forged letter supposedly signed by the Netziv himself. The Netziv was arrested. Imagine this, he's already, an older man when this happened. And he was interrogated, but he was finally free. This event took its toll both on the yeshiva and the Netziv. From that day forward, the authorities focused their attention on Volozhin. It's like became this relentless campaign, to interfere with the education that was going on there. Regular inspections of the yeshiva by the education ministry, new laws and regulations, and continual harassment of the yeshiva by all local and regional authorities ensued. This is really sad. To further complicate the situation in later years, another great fire raged in Volozhin. This is a 3-story building with that's a high building for those days. In a smaller town. And it destroyed the town and the new yeshiva building as well. Through superhuman efforts, the Netziv kept the yeshiva in session in temporary quarters, and he was able to raise the necessary funds to rebuild the yeshiva for a second time. So again, the shulachim would have been sent forth from the yeshiva. What they would often do is they would come to a town and perhaps give a shiur, to show the great level of learning that was going on, in Volozhin. And then people would open up their pockets, right, and make contributions. Within 12 months, so they were able to build a new building enough money. The government, in wonderment at the tenacity of the yeshiva, now realized that Volozhin stood in the way of the implementation of its new radically brutal politics towards the Jews that are coming now to the end of the 19th century. And like yeshiva said, the government said, I've had it up to here with the people from Volozhin, right? It then redoubled its efforts to control the yeshiva, and failing it, resolved to close it. In 1887, the director of schools for the Vilna district inspected Volozhin. Again, Volozhin is like a suburb of Vilna. He claimed to have found many illegal students without proper ID papers in the yeshiva. I mean, there were kids, coming, young men coming, from all over, right? Additionally, most students were found to be deficient in their knowledge of Russian language, and culture. He then made further demands concerning the faculty and curriculum of the school. The yeshiva somehow continued to prosper scholastically and spiritually. Already at this time, but also in the 20th century, you would attract, even if you had yeshiva scholars, young men who were, showed great promise, living even in the US, but they would actually go back to Europe and learn in yeshivas. Right. So I'm talking about the Volozhin grew to 425 students. I actually read somewhere there were up to 450 students. Many of them destined to be the leaders of European Jewry for the next 50 years. Under Rav Chaim Soloveitchik and the aging Netziv, the level of Torah study reached great heights of creativity and accomplishment. The vast majority of the students remained loyal to Volozhin and to its goals and ideals. And there are always these people who were causing problems, but really, the most of the students were really dedicated to the learning. However, there were fissures from within. From 1860 forward, so just from the beginning of the Civil War, U.S. just to kind of tolerate, an active Haskalah cell operated within the yeshiva. Though only a small minority of students were associated with it, its existence was a divisive force within the yeshiva. Many of the students who formed the cell of Haskalah within Volozhin went on to become the leaders of various Jewish and non-Jewish secular movements. And I remember, when I told you I had Hebrew literature, in high school, so you would read the stories like Moshe Sforman and other great authors. They would describe a yeshiva student, but like sitting here with a Gemara, the Gemara is pretty big, but he would have some sort of a secular, and so unless the Rebbe came around and told him what was going on, he was studying something else other than the Gemara. This next part I found very interesting. There also existed another clandestine group in the yeshiva called Nes Siona. Now, there's a town in Israel called Nes Siona. This group was tolerated by the Netziv, who himself was a supporter of the Chovevei Tzion organization. So if I ever give a class about, history of Israel, it would include this. It was a very active, organization that, sponsored people to go to live in the land of Israel.
So this was it.
The Chovevei Tzion movement,
But
right?
the Nes Siona.
Well, that was so probably because of this group, Nes Siona. So, as some of these more from people came to live in the land of Israel, so they named it after some movements that were already, in existence in Europe. So again, the Netziv himself was a supporter of the Chovevei Tzion movement, you could almost say. Nes Siona was formed in 1885, and its activities raised the suspicions of the government, who regarded its activities as being anti-state. Well, they certainly weren't in love with Russia, that's for sure. But but the fact that they wanted to go and live elsewhere, this was terrible. This caused the administration itself to object to the group's existence within the yeshiva. In 1889, it was forced to disband. We're talking about the Chovevei Tzion. In 1890, a new organization called Netzach Yisrael was formed in the yeshiva, which again espoused the cause of the land of Israel among the student body. This organization was also demanded of its members an intense love of the Jewish people, of Jewish scholarship. So again, these are all, religious, Zionist movements. Observance of all the Torah precepts and a dedication to Jewish leadership. Many future rabbis and leaders were members of this group. After the closure of Volozhin, the group disbanded, but some of its members provided the leadership of other new organizations. So you see the Netziv is supportive of this idea of that we should have Shivat Zion. We should return ultimately to Zion, populate the land again. Again, this is the time period of the Ottoman Empire. This is not even the British are not ruling. That only happens at the end of World War One. The Nitziv now attempted to bring his eldest son, the famed rabbi of Moscow, Rav Chaim Berlin, these dates 1832 to 1912, into the administration and direction of the yeshiva. In 1890, Rav Chaim moved to Volozhin, bringing with him his world-famous library of Judaica and rabbinics. I mean, a lot of these were handwritten, or they were incunabula. They were things that were printed, in medieval times. I mean, these were very rare. He then began to deliver Talmudic lectures in the yeshiva. However, his style was not popular with many of the students who were accustomed to the genius and style of Rav Chaim Soloveitchik. Opposition to him grew slowly within the student body. Saddened and burdened, the Nitziv did not pursue the issue of succession, and Rav Chaim Berlin left soon after for Berlin, Paris, Amsterdam, London, and other communities. There he helped raise funds to help defray the deficit of the yeshiva. He eventually settled in Yerushalayim, where he served as Rav until his death. Now we're going to come to the end of Volozhin. On December 22nd, 1891, the Russian government made new official demands of the yeshiva that rendered its existence impossible. I remember it was founded in 1803, and now we're going to come to its demise. The four main requirements. So this is what they were demanding of the Volozhin, of the yeshiva. One, no Talmudic studies allowed at night. Every yeshiva has learning. Secular studies is so ironic. This is the opposite. Nowadays, secular studies to be taught from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Nowadays, if you go to yeshiva, you do your Jewish studies up until then, and at 3 p.m., then the secular studies begin. All right. The school day could be no longer than 10 hours per day. And four, I think this is the most crucial, all the faculty must have diplomas from recognized Russian educational institutions. Well, right, did they go to these schools? No. These requirements were so extreme that they made it impossible for the Nitziv to keep the yeshiva open. Basically, this decree demanded that Volozhin cease to function as a yeshiva. In January 1892, the Russian inspectors came to Volozhin to enforce the decree, but the Nitziv refused to accommodate them. The yeshiva was forced to close, and its students went into exile. Other yeshivas now grew, and Torah learning continued to spread throughout Lithuania, but never again was there a yeshiva as great as Volozhin. And the Nitziv died the year after. I'm sure he was an old man, I'm sure he's frail, but I'm sure he's dying of a broken heart, So a very sad end to this great yeshiva, in the Jewish world. At some point, we'll get back to some. I never quite finished. There was a page I'd given out called 19th Century Torah Masters, but I think since we're on a roll now of yeshivas, so we'll just go into the one I just prepared, which is called The Yeshiva Movement Expands. So now we're going to learn about some other great yeshivas. Now remember, almost all of these yeshivas are in Lithuania, and most of them are around Vilna. They're not necessarily in Vilna, but they're in towns near Vilna. It's probably the same suburb, of Vilna. And we will learn a bit about Kovno, which is Kaunas or something. I don't know. Right. And we'll learn about one very great famous yeshiva that was in Kovno. All right. So let's talk about the Mir Yeshiva, which still exists today, but obviously not in Lithuania. By the way, do you know that 95% of Lithuanian Jews were murdered by the Nazis? 95%.
No, not by the Nazis, but the Lithuanians.
Well, they
were very.
were involved with it. But it was the Nazis' brilliant idea to kill them all. Yeah, and then the Lithuanians said, you know, we'll join
I'll
them.
help you.
Yeah, right.
I'll
Exactly.
give you his, I know them.
All right, so let's learn a little bit about the Mir Yeshiva. I remember my son Shalom was he learned 2 years in Karen Biavna, which is a Hesder Yeshiva. Then he didn't say he wanted to stay a third year. Oh, he convinced me of this. But he stayed a third year learning. He wanted to go to Mir. I said, if you go there, you're going into the dark hole of Calcutta. So I said, no, you cannot go there. And instead he went to, there was a man, Rob Ilson, who actually had a yeshiva in, it was in Mega Sharim, actually. It was like a building he had purchased and renovated. And I checked with my brother. He said, no, it's one of the kids from there. They all go on to college, you know. And that was one thing I insisted. My all kids all had to have a college education. You want to do something different once you know, you have that degree, gesundheit. But, you know, from my home, you were first, you know, yes, they sure did. Can have a pretty strong personality, I guess, you know. It comes directly from the silver side of my family. So now let's learn a little bit about the Mir, you know, which really has an excellent reputation. Maybe I wasn't right that I did that to my son,
Why
but you know,
Why
whatever.
What were you against Mir?
Because yeah, it's a very black hat yeshiva,
Oh,
and they certainly don't approve of secular studies.
oh,
And I was determined that he was going to come back to the U.S. and finish his college education in America. Well, do you know that YU and Stern now have a program in Israel in Bayit Hagan, where they have dorms there for girls and for boys. It just started this past year. I have a granddaughter who's going next year, where they Judaic studies are all held like where that Grus Kolel is, you know, that area. My another grandson who's living now in Shraga or something. I don't know. It's housed in the same building. What's it called? Torah Shraga. Oh, okay. And although we're coming back to the US about the other granddaughter is staying on. She was in the girls' Shalavim, she's staying on. She's going to be attending this new school, again, just founded. Until she told me, I didn't even know about it. Where again, you have your Judaic studies, probably 9 to 3, the opposite, you know, when the government wanted to institute here. And then how they take them to Bar Ilan, they must have buses. Take the kids to Bar Ilan, and then they can get their secular studies.
it's a long sled, no?
It's a Bar Ilan.
It's actually no.
Yeah, I know with the highways now are unbelievable. Yeah.
But then back.
Yeah. I mean, and then you still have homework. Yeah, I mean, it won't be easy, but she's very excited about it. So as a result, she'll get a diploma. I don't think her diploma will be from Bar Ilan. I don't really know how it works. But it'd be from one class.
Because,
But this way she's living in Eretz Yisrael, that's what she wants to do, right? Okay, so let's learn a little bit about Mir before class ends. A dozen years after the founding of the Lodge, the second yeshiva of its type was founded in the small town of Mir in Lithuania. It was opened in 1815 by a leading scholar of the community, a layman called Shmuel Tikatinsky. I never heard of him before, but I guess he was a wealthy man. I don't know when he was born. I looked it up at a few sources,
you know,
but it said that he dies in 1835. All right, so for 20 years, you know, he's going to be supporting this yeshiva. For the first 8 years of the yeshiva, he supported the yeshiva single-handedly. His son, Abraham, sorry, there's a V missing, Abraham, soon joined his father as head of the yeshiva. Mir gradually gained popularity and stature, and by 1840, it numbered 100 students. So Bologna is still the largest yeshiva, but Mir is growing also. In 1835, both Shmuel, right, the founder, and his son, Rav Abraham Tikatinsky, died tragically. Again, you know, I look in different sources, you know, I don't have a total picture of everything though, because each book I've looked, emphasizes something, and some books don't even touch this stuff. The general Jewish history books don't even talk so much about the yeshiva movement. Rav Yosef David Mir, the rabbi of Mir, then assumed the leadership. In other words, it would be a rav of a town, and then there would be a rosh yeshiva. Sometimes they were combined in one person. In 1850, Chaim Lev Tikatinsky, so he's born 1823, he dies in 1899. The grandson of the founder returned to Mir and became the leading educator in the Shiva. Rav Chaim Lev was an outstanding teacher, and under his leadership, Mir established itself firmly as a leading yeshiva, second only to Volozhin in numbers and reputation. All right, so this is the number 2 yeshiva institution in Lithuania.
Correct.
Rav Chaim Lev died in 1899, leaving his son Avraham as head of Mir. All right, so you see how we're going through several generations, now the 4th generation. Avraham immediately began to search for a charismatic figure who could inspire and expand the yeshiva. At the same time, Rav Eliyahu David Rabinowitz Truman left the post of rabbi of Mir to emigrate to Yerushalayim. Thus, the possibility, we don't, when I used to first learn about the Chalutzim, like they were all these secular Jews, there were religious Jews already traveling to live and settle in Israel. The whole about that Hovetzion movement, we talked about. So the fact that the Rav now dies, right? Up until now, the head of the Mir Yeshiva has passed away. But now, this great grandson is in charge. The possibility of finding one person to head both the community and the yeshiva arose. That person was Rav Eliyahu Bar Kamai. So his dates are 1840 to 1917. He served as the rabbi of Mir and now joined Rav Avraham as head of the yeshiva. It was under Rav Kamai that Mir became the leading yeshiva of Lithuania. All right, so Volozhin no longer exists. Mir is not going to become the preeminent institution of learning. It grew in numbers and stature, and before World War I, had a student population of almost 250 young men. Not quite as large as Volozhin had once been, but still very sizable in number. It produced many great rabbinic leaders and was strongly influential on Jewish life in Lithuania. So I didn't put in too much about the 20th century yet, but what happens is eventually they pick up some of these great rabbanim. They're going to go to Hebron. That's where the Hebron yeshiva comes into being. And then, there was a horrible massacre in Hebron in 1929. So many then went to reestablish the yeshiva. The Mir Yeshiva is in Yerushalayim, right? And then eventually came to the U.S. and there's a Mir Yeshiva, in the U.S. Well, I guess it's in Brooklyn. I don't know enough about all these other yeshivas. Again, but I didn't include that here because when we start doing more of the 20th century, I'll give you some more tidbits.
They have also in South Africa, the Mir Yeshiva.
What's that?
The Mir Yeshiva is also functioning in South Africa.
Oh, they still have a branch.
The Lithuanian went to South Africa.
Oh, I know. It's so interesting. My year that I spent in Israel, so of course I was friends with the American girls, who I had gone with, but I also became friends of the South African girls. And then I realized afterward we have a link because their grandparents came from Lithuania, as did my, grandparents. I don't know, I just felt an affinity to these South African girls. Of course, then they could speak English. So, I tried to become friends with Israelis. It was very difficult because my knowledge of Hebrew was mostly from print. I did learn to speak Hebrew when I go back now. Even the taxi drivers, they're always very impressed, that I can hold a conversation, in Hebrew. I think that I learned more Hebrew than my kids did for all the years that they learned in different yeshivas and seminaries. Because they were all only with Americans. I went to Hebrew University, got the ideas of those girls' schools that are grateful of it. He didn't exist the year I was there. Nicola existed, but it was really for Israeli girls. So I went to Hebrew U and I took, I mean, I had to be careful what subjects I took because obviously to go to secular college. I went to start taking a Gemara class. Well, I dropped out of that quickly. I mean, the guy wasn't from, I mean, I couldn't, study with somebody, like that. But as a result, even I was a history major. My courses in history and government, they were all in Hebrew. So I was forced, speaking, but I did not feel comfortable speaking the Hebrew language though, till I was close to Pesach. I remember thinking of one day, all of a sudden, gee, I'm not translating everything in my head. I can just speak Hebrew naturally. So I don't know a lot of modern terms. And the newspaper is very hard because they're talking about all sorts of, armaments and this, and I don't know what they're talking about, but I can definitely converse and do, make myself known and understood. Yes.
I'm curious, what happened, what was with the Galiciana Jews?
Uh,
This.
Well, we'll have to understand, in the Galicianer world, a lot of them are Hasidish. They too are going to start founding yeshivas also. After, they see what's happening in Lithuania. But we don't have as many like great yeshivas or great rabbanim who are coming out of like the Lithuanian world.
I guess many of them went to study in Bologna.
They maybe. Now, I told you many of them are Hasidish. They would
Right,
not
right, they
have
know.
learned.
So
in it.
Kiddush and Mikdash can go together.
Yeah,
It's different mentality completely,
yeah.
and the behavior is different in accepting
So,
people.
listen, I come from a very Misnah-Bishop family.
Yeah.
They do not like Hasidics, so, although my father, I remember, they did have respect for the Lubavitch Rabbi because they thought he was a learned man and,
Yes. And he was
and he did have a whole.
and it was also Farat stuff, and because of who Farat it's more the Litvishin. Just accepting people for whatever they are and bringing them into the fold.
Right, who you talking about?
The-
The Hasidim?
I mean, the Lubavitcher.
Oh, yeah, that's, yeah,
The same frame of
A whole-
mind, the Litvishin.
whole different way of looking at Jewish life. All right, let me just turn this off.
Thank you very much.
My great pleasure. End the meeting.